Good evening. Welcome to another episode of David Michael Woods Unfiltered. We want to break down some key legal analysts and some talk shows as they break down this court case, New York versus Trump, as Stormy Daniels takes the stand.
Our first episode is going to be talking about the historical trial and how high the stakes are for this country. How do you plan on covering this differently?
Well, from a completely different point of view, because I think this is a historic trial. Yes, it is. I think maybe people don't recognize what's really at stake here. Yeah. The stakes are very high. Don't care which side you come down on, whether you're a Trump fan, you don't like Trump, doesn't matter. This is the first time a president has gone to a criminal trial.
Oh shit!
And
how crazy
he
you got
is
him looking.
Not only a past president, he is a current candidate for the presidency, and he is being tried criminally. And if, in fact, he is convicted, he could face 4 years in prison. Now, what folks may not understand is there's a lot of states you can't vote if you're a convicted felon, but you can be elected president as a convicted felon. And if he is convicted as a felon and is subsequently elected as president, this inauguration could happen at Rikers Island, or it could happen in prison. He could be having his Oval Office meetings in a jail cell. What's the international community going to do if we elect someone that's in prison as president?
Went through my mind. I mean, I don't have any real answers here, but it's fair that we ask, because why would the government be going and rearranging what they collected? It's something that Jim Jordan is asking at this moment. And as I said, he just announced this special investigation. Let's hear from him himself. Here he is on Fox.
Order of the documents seized was changed. That one sentence says it all. Most people would call that tampering with evidence. The physical documents didn't match up with the scanned documents. And here's the irony, Sean. This is Jack Smith mishandling the very documents that he's charging President Trump with mishandling. Go figure. I mean, that to me is the ultimate irony here. Not to mention, of course, the double standard. We had Robert Hur 6 weeks ago in front of our committee. Robert Hur said Joe Biden met the elements of the crime. He knowingly kept, knowingly disclosed classified information. But he wasn't charged because he says he was a forgetful old man. And we also established motive. Robert Hur said on page 231 of his report, Joe Biden had strong motivations for ignoring classified procedures because he was writing a book for which he got paid $8 million. So he had an $8 million motive. He met the elements, but he doesn't get charged. President Trump does. And then Jack Smith mishandles the very documents. You can't make this stuff up.
It comes to the double standard. Now, I get it. Okay. You know, he wasn't as forthcoming, whatever, as Joe Biden was, who was like, oh, come on in. They're right in the garage next to the Corvette. Or even as forthcoming as Pence, who suddenly seemed to be finding these things like in the walls, in all the nooks and crannies in his home. Pence is like, oh, I got another. And the beach house out in Delaware for Biden had to get combed through. The feds found all kinds of things. And yes, they got him on it. But why is it that there's such a double standard? I mean, I think maybe it had a little something to do with the resistance that Trump had, but it's not just that. There's something else entirely, right? And you know it, I know it, Jim Jordan knows it. The something else entirely has to do with the powers that be wanting Donald Trump to stay as far away from the Oval Office as humanly possible. Now, don't kid yourself, because they do this to anyone. Remember how they were going after Ron DeSantis when they thought Ron DeSantis could be the guy? They were going after him really hard, and they were calling him all kinds of nasty things. I mean, Florida was like no-go zone. In fact, I do believe one of the women on The View actually called it a no-go zone and discouraged people from vacationing there because it was that bad. It was that bad because they were going to present anyone who was the Republican candidate for president of the United States as that bad. If you vote for anyone on the other side of the aisle, then you are bad. This is the mantra that they're going with, that they feel sells, and this is what they're going to stick with. So, sure, I mean, maybe Donald Trump doesn't always do himself some favors. Maybe he actually is calling out the injustice in ways that a lot of politicians might be afraid to do. Maybe he's willing to stand up to the insanity and the crazies that are going after him with everything they've got. But let's be very clear. Whoever's in that spot would be under attack. Whoever is in that spot. All right. So it's exclusive to Donald Trump. And this is why it's so important right now, ladies and gentlemen, regardless of what you think of Trump, you got to think about the overall bigger picture here. How they're sacrificing your rights. How willing they are to do that. Whether it be going through tainted, I mean, they're tampering with evidence. Now it's tainted. How do you have a case with tampered evidence? I mean, in most cases, that stuff would get thrown out. Or consider what's going on in New York City today. I mean, when it all adds up to a whole bunch of nothing. You have Letitia James. No one gets me. Coming in, trying to decide after the fact that she can determine the value of a property as opposed to the bank that's lending the money. In Donald Trump's case, Deutsche Bank, which lent the money to him based on the valuations that both he and Deutsche Bank agreed to, decided were worthwhile. So if you say your house is worth X and you go to JP Morgan Chase or Citibank or Bank of America and you say, hey, you know what? I want to borrow Y because my house is worth X. And Citibank or Bank of America or JP Morgan Chase says, okay, well, let's go check that out, right? Because we're going to do our due diligence. They're going to make sure that your house is worth X before they allow you to borrow Y. Well, now you could have Letitia James or anyone else floating in from outer space saying, you know what? We don't think it's really worth X. We think it's worth Z. And because it's worth Z, you shouldn't get Y. And by the way, you're going to jail. Really? And we're going to charge you multiples of what that house was ever worth in the first place. That's effectively what they did to him. With the nearly $500 million in bail, getting whittled down to $175 million, and she didn't even want to
there before she took the stand to try to say that she is irrelevant. Her testimony is irrelevant, and certainly any descriptions of the alleged interlude are irrelevant. And the prosecution said, no, we need to establish it. We have to show that sex took place. And the judge said, okay. So then she starts talking about how they had conversations about STDs in the porn industry. She actually testified and was allowed to that he didn't wear a condom. Okay, so the jury's now heard that he's having an extramarital affair with a porn star without wearing a condom. How is that, again, relevant to the core issue of campaign finance violations or falsifying business records? And she goes on and on about the details of the missionary. Why do we know it was missionary, right? Like all this stuff she got in without much of a fight, right? The defense stood up here or there, but not that much because they'd just been overruled at the beginning of her testimony. And you and I both know you don't want to look like it's hurting me. You know, when you've already been ruled against privately by the judge and you know all this stuff is coming in, you don't stand on every question because you're just telegraphing to the jury, this shit is really hurting me. So they pick their places to object. Then they have a sidebar and the judge is like, this is not appropriate testimony. I expected more objections from the defense. He's blaming them for the situation he created.
Well, he's putting them between a rock and a hard place because if you don't object, you can waive the error for appeal. You can be deemed to have not objected timely. They should have asked for like a continuing objection or something like that. Hopefully everything that was said at sidebar was taken down and there's no waiver issues. But apparently Judge Merchan he's not been reading his slip opinions because I think he failed to read that the appeals court in New York has reversed one of his colleagues for allowing prosecutors to put in too much irrelevant stuff and to slime Harvey Weinstein to the point that it created an unfair trial. And of course, that case was recently reversed. Judge Merchan would do well to take a lesson from that. This testimony is, I mean, we've said it's irrelevant, and I don't know any other way to say it other than it's now cumulative. It's the kind of evidence that even if it were relevant to one of the issues, it's so unfairly prejudicial to the defense that it becomes otherwise inadmissible. Now, the only thing I think that you can say about this testimony that might help Donald Trump, one of the points that he is making, and I think he's doing a good job making it through his counsel, is that any payments, and by the way, I'm not going to call them hush money because that implies there's something sinister, but the media will call it a hush money payment. His purpose in doing that is not for benefiting his campaign. Now we see that he could have other non-related purposes, like, you know, to avoid embarrassment and also for the sake of his spouse and any number in his business enterprises, things that are unrelated to the campaign. So this, I think, helps him make that argument that even if there was anything wrong with it, it wasn't for the purpose of benefiting the campaign. And that is the so-called other crime that the now bootstrapped.
Well, wait a minute, because on that front, she testified that he did not ask her to keep it quiet. The prosecution brought out testimony from Stormy that Trump did not say, "Don't tell anyone," at any point or after it happened, immediately after it happened. And they wanted to bring that out to suggest Trump didn't want to shut her up until he ran for office.
Well, there's also, they have to bring that out because she's now intimating through her testimony, I think, that perhaps somehow this was something less than fully consensual. I think that's the sinister motive behind Alvin Bragg's testimony. I think he knew good and well what she was going to say about possibly blacking out and all that sort of thing, because that sort of the message to the jury that he's a real sinister and evil person. To me, that was the real purpose of this testimony.
That, I mean,
it's
truly
points.
shocking. Yeah, go ahead, Julian.
Yeah. So again, you know, I take Phil's point on the NDA hush money semantic issue, but you said that the prosecutors said they needed to establish that sex occurred. That's just wrong as a matter of law. Whether or not sex occurred, there was an NDA, and the only issue before the court is whether the NDA was misreported on the business records. And I'm not sure, by the way, calling an NDA a legal expense is a misreporting. There's no clear guidance in New York on that. So that's one point. So whether they had sex is completely irrelevant. The only question is whether there was an NDA that was misreported on business records and whether there was a federal crime that misreporting was furthering. And whether, you know, you want to subjectively say one of the purposes, to Phil's point, was not reporting it on federal campaign records. If you read the rules, the FEC rules, it's clear that an NDA is not considered a reportable campaign expenditure.
We talked about that on the phone. It's what matters is the nature of the expenditure, not the subjective motivation in the payor's mind.
Correct, but even if it was, it wouldn't have been reportable till 2017, so it couldn't have been a
when he was already in
2016 election. When he was already in office, and even if it was, Bragg doesn't have jurisdiction to enforce that. So this case has become a joke. I mean, this is embarrassing. This is exactly what the left argued during the Bill Clinton and other prosecutions.
Well, but wait, we know that, but that's like the sweeping condemnations are interesting, but I want to stay to the specifics because we got a lot of them to get through today. Okay. And that brings me to Stormy's claim. This is another area in which they tried to ding her up on cross. She claimed that she was threatened. So the prosecution's trying to say you came forward and or you did not come forward, right? You did not come forward to say anything about this until you decided to shake down Donald Trump. That's what you wanted to do, shake him down. And she's like, no, the reason I didn't come forward earlier is because I was threatened. I was in a parking lot years ago, like after it happened, closer in time to when it happened, and a man came up to me in a parking lot when I was in Las Vegas with my daughter, and he threatened me that if I told people I was going to be in some sort of trouble. And she says that she didn't report it because it would have been upsetting to the person she was in a relationship with at the time. Now, the New York Times reports that this is an account This is an account she never told some of the people who worked closely with her on the NDA. And she first revealed it in that 60 Minutes interview in 2018. All right. So now in 2018, she for the first time says the reason I haven't come forward until now, 12 years after the act by that point, was because somebody threatened me. And the prosecution got all over her. Actually, wait, we have a soundbite of what she told Anderson Cooper in 2018 about what she did right after this alleged scary parking lot threat.
And a guy walked up on me and said to me, "Leave Trump alone, forget the story." And then he leaned around and looked at my daughter and said, "It's a beautiful little girl. It'd be a shame if something happened to her mom." And then he was gone. I was rattled. I remember going into the workout class and my hands were shaking so much I was afraid I was going to drop her.
Did you go to the police?
No.
Why?
Because I was scared.
Okay. So back then, she says, I'm rattled. And the prosecution gets up in her grill and says, in your book, you write that you went to an exercise class after this alleged threat. So you went to an exercise class, and the defense is trying to suggest she made up the whole thing to explain why she didn't come forward earlier. The question by the defense counsel was, you were using it as an excuse to lie. You used this supposed threat as an excuse for why you did not talk publicly. She said, the man who allegedly threatened you doesn't exist, does he? I thought that was actually quite effective, because who goes into an exercise class right after they've been threatened? Their life has been threatened if they reveal that they've had sex with Donald Trump.
Yeah, if you're asking me, I don't think anybody does.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing that it just defies common sense. It defies belief. It's the kind of thing that there's no way that it's ever going to be able to be conclusively proven one way or the other. And it's the kind of thing, if you like Donald Trump, or you're, or at least not opposed to the man, you might tend to say, well, she's lying. But on the other hand, if you just can't see past your visceral hatred for the defendant, you absolutely believe that is the gospel truth. And so it's easy for the kind of thing for a witness to just come out and say, because there's no a way to prove or disprove it. We're not going to hear from anybody else that was there. We're not going to see any security camera videos from wherever it was. There's no police reports. There's no investigation. It's easy to fabricate and difficult to disprove. It's the kind of thing that all the defense lawyer can do is ask the question the way that he asked it and leave it there, because there's no way to prove it through any kind of intrinsic facts otherwise.
So they're just trying to chip away at her credibility, ding her up and ding her up. And Julian, they did that by getting her in part to admit she hates Donald Trump. She would love to see him incarcerated. And also she admitted on the stand that even though she's been ordered by a federal judge to pay his attorney's costs in connection with the defamation suit she brought against him and lost, she won't pay it. It's some, I think, $500,000. And she said on cross, I'm not going to pay it. I don't care. She admitted that she had previously said she'll never pay it and she doesn't care about the court order. So this jury is hearing she'll defy a court order to pay what she owes when it comes to Donald Trump. She's dying to see him incarcerated and she hates him. And they have more than enough basis to disregard every word she has said. For that reason alone, never mind the many inconsistencies we just went through, many of which they heard about.
Right now in former President Trump's New York criminal trial. No cameras in there. So we do a couple of things for you here on Fox. You see the box on the right of your screen with a lot of information that is contemporaneous to either what we're reporting here or exactly what's going on in the courtroom. We give analysis, we give the facts, all of it right here on Fox, so stay tuned. Sex film worker Stormy Daniels has been on the witness stand for a couple of hours now, except for one short break that they have taken. They haven't taken a break for lunch yet, so she's still talking. And at one point, the judge admonished the prosecution, I don't know how much he meant it, not to go too far and wide and let too much detail get into the case. This woman is testifying like she paid for the microphone. Anyway, Daniels has been recalling her alleged encounter with the former president inside of a Lake Tahoe hotel room 18 years ago with a lot of detail. She describes all sorts of things that were going on with her and with him, and she was staring at the ceiling and blah, 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 blah. She says when she put her shoes on, according to her, after it allegedly had happened and it was over, she was so nervous her hands were shaking. She's a sex film worker. She gets paid to have sex on TV. Or OnlyFans, or whatever it is her deal now. Movies, OnlyFans, whatever media she's choosing. Just to put it into context. That's what this woman has in her past, and according to her, OnlyFans in her present. So the defense's claim that too many details are being let in is relevant. So we'll see what happens now that the judges said it, the defense attorneys have said it. I want to bring in criminal defense attorney Brian Claypool. So Donald Trump is sitting there. What would you do as a defense attorney with that going on?
Hey, Harris, great to see you again. Without question, I would be objecting on the record to all of these questions regarding details of this alleged affair between former President Trump and Stormy Daniels. I don't care what the judge says. Trump's lawyer should say, we want to make a record, right? So just so your viewers know, there needs to be a record made of every objection to this questioning for an appellate court then to go look at that record and see these objections. And during breaks, you know what else I would be doing? I'd be calling a conference with the judge outside the presence of the jury, and I'd argue that all of this testimony is irrelevant. All of this testimony is prejudicial. And Harris, there's an evidence code section out here in California, 352. We argue it all the time. What does that mean? That means that even if a piece of evidence is remotely relevant, it can be not led into court before the jury because it's prejudicial. This judge should be making that analysis and should not be allowing most, if not all, of this testimony.
So there was some discussion here on the couch about her being made out to be a victim. And there's part of the testimony via one of our journalists inside the courtroom. Daniels has offered a few answers about her continued contacts and meetings with Trump. She says she wanted to keep prospects of apprentice alive. So if there are any questions about this being transactional, she has told us that from the very beginning. I don't know if extortion is something that they can work with. I don't know what they can work with on the defense side, but they certainly can work with the word transactional if that matters. Not sure that that's illegal in your state. She has testified that she felt comfortable meeting with Trump in public spaces because it would be safe. What is she doing here? At one point, she said, when the sex act was over, that she alleged, when the sex act that she alleged was over, her memory went away. She kind of blacked out. She got dizzy. But no, she wasn't drugged, she said. She's bringing things in, and it makes her look like a victim.
Yeah, Harris, great point. And none of this has to do with the elements of the alleged crime, right? And not only is she trying to make herself look like a victim, but look, let's call out what the prosecutors are doing. If this was purely a legal analysis of this case, this testimony wouldn't be coming in. And as of now, Trump is winning this trial by a landslide. But unfortunately, we have prosecutors that don't really care about relevant facts. They don't care about the fact that they can't prove the law, right? So what they're doing is they're making Stormy Daniels out as a victim. And then even more important than that, they are trying to characterize former President Trump as unsavory. This guy's dirty. Look at what he's doing during his marriage, right? To try to get this jury to vote at the end of this case based on emotion, based on we don't like this guy and what he did. And that's what we call it's like juror interference. And it's really tragic, Harris.
Yeah, look, if they're going to be nasty on one side, is there room for the defense to say, well, was this transactional? How many men have you had transactional sex with? How is this any different? How many have there been? How many in the movies? How much? I mean, you could certainly show who she is, because this jury, like America, is smart. And these prosecutors are treating those people like they don't have a brain in their heads.
Yeah, that's actually an excellent point. What's the cross-examination going to look at? And guess what the prosecutors did? They opened up the door, right, to do exactly what you said. They should now go into all of that because she opened up the door. How many times have you done adult films? How many times have you had sexual acts on TV? You know, talk about her career, how she hasn't done much in the last few years. But look, at the end of the day, here are the most important questions that Trump's lawyers need to get up and ask her. I would ask her point blank, have you ever talked to Trump about falsifying a financial document? Do you know anything about that? She'll say, no, end of cross-examination.
Wow. You got a smile from Steve Hilton out here like, oh, okay, that was the bingo win. Brian Claypool, always great to talk with you. Appreciate your expertise and your time. Thank you. Kennedy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Number one, the judge sounds like a perv because he wants her to talk in lurid detail, and he's asking her to speak more slowly. That's gross. Number two, let's say the transaction did take place. I'm talking about the physical one. Her being surprised that she was going to a hotel room alone with a man to have body congress is like Pete Sampras being surprised at being invited to a tennis court and you want to see his serve. And then he says, I started shaking when I saw a tennis racket. I didn't know what to do with it. It's like, bro, you've won 17 majors. And, it's this woman saying that she blacked out because she was so nervous is like a surgeon saying he barfed at the sight of blood. It's a little hard to believe.
It's very hard to believe because that's what she got paid to do on film. I mean, it wasn't even like she was used to doing it in the corners of darkness. She was having sex in front of many cameras.
Well lit.
Steve.
So this has to be the low point in this complete farce of a trial. And this is the day of all days that conclusively proves what Trump's been saying all along. As you said, Kayleigh, this clearly is, because all our legal experts have confirmed, irrelevant, nothing to do with the case in point. It is designed to try and damage Trump. It is clearly the case that this is now an election interference farce. And by the way, let's remember who else has done this. Which other countries have harnessed their judicial system corruptly in this terrifying way that we're seeing now in America? Just within the last year, Pakistan. They did it in Pakistan to bring down Imran Khan when he's running for president. Putin in Russia used the legal system to take his opponent off the ballot. That's the company these Democrats, demented with their anti-Trump rage, Biden and Bragg and all of them, that's the company they've now put America in, Pakistan and Putin's Russia. And these are the people who lecture us about democracy and the rule of law. It is absolutely disgusting.
Yeah. And then they let her lecture us about all sorts of tawdry things. Kayleigh.
Yeah, I think that an important thing happened here. So Stormy Daniels was suggesting that she only felt safe around Trump in public. To your point, victimhood was the theme. And the judge struck that from testimony. I mean, that's in no way relevant to this case.
Yeah, but the jury already heard it.
But the jury already heard it. And Carrie Kupak, who's in the courtroom, said, imagine if you're a juror on this case and you are a female juror and you are hearing these details. You cannot get that out of your mind. These jurors are human. And this is why Stormy Daniels should not be on the stand.
Yeah. I still think that people are smarter than the prosecution is giving them credit for.
So it's interesting because I was doing our live coverage following along with our minute-by-minute updates from inside the courtroom, and I had the exact opposite impression. Now, you had the benefit of being in the courtroom, so I will defer to that, but we do also have to be careful when we play sort of amateur psychologists to the jurors' movements, right? Though they were leaning forward, they were taking notes. Okay, they could be taking notes because they think this is a great point, or they could be taking notes because they think this makes no sense and I don't believe it. So let's just all be cautious in reading into the jurors' physicality. My impression was she was plausible on her explanation of what happened in that hotel room. It's hard for me to believe that a juror heard that and thought this is entirely made up. There may well be some embellishments, with Arthur, I think, pointed out effectively in the last hour, but I think it's quite clear they had sex in 2006 in that hotel room. But the cross-exam, boy, her responses were disastrous. I mean, do you hate Donald Trump? Yes, of course she does. That's a big deal. When the witness hates the person whose liberty is at stake, that's a big damn deal. And she's putting out tweets, fantasizing about him being in jail. That really undermines the credibility. The fact that she owes him $500,000, she, by order of a court, owes Donald Trump $500,000 and said, I will never pay him. I will defy a court order. The defense is going to say she's willing to defy a court order. Why? She's not willing to respect an order of a judge. Why is she going to respect this oath she took? So I thought it went quite poorly on cross-exam. At the end of direct, I thought, okay, they got what they needed, but I think the cross is making real inroads.
Can I ask you both about
I think this is an important point. I'm just going to echo this right now because you heard him say, in fact, that she was a disaster. What did I tell you? That they were taking a huge gamble by putting this woman on the stand. I mean, considering, one, her profession, considering, two, that she's already lost a case against Donald Trump, already owed him money, of course, in that case. because she broke a non-disclosure agreement, and now she still owes him money. In fact, the number is close to $500,000. So that's a lot of money. She doesn't like him. She's out tweeting against him, has made that hate very clear, and that vitriol came through just in front of the jury on that cross-examination quite vividly. And so I think that's a big deal when you think about how she seems to have, I'll use this term, a personal vendetta. I'm not the only one using it. Again, let's go back to CNN. Abby Phillip over there saying Stormy Daniels seems to have this personal vendetta against Trump. None of this is good for the prosecution's case. Watch.
See, but
he's going to have no choice. And don't forget, he's getting prepped and prepped and prepped. But Anderson, can we just touch about how sick it is that Stormy Daniels said that here's Donald Trump hitting on her, wants to have sex with her, and he's like, you remind me of my daughter. That's weird stuff, man.
Well, she was saying it was because she's smart, pretty. When she said she was
okay, when you hit on a girl, you don't say you remind me of my daughter. That's nuts.
To that point,
disgusting.
One thing that stood out to me is someone who's covered Trump since even before he was in the White House. Watching him sitting there and having to listen to the way she talked about him, it wasn't just what she said and the salacious points. She was so derisive. She was mocking him basically at several points. She was saying he was old enough to be my dad. He was older than my father. She was 27. He was 60. She was saying she didn't enjoy it. She didn't want to be there. You know, she's had all these points where then in the cross-examination, she was like, yeah, I do hate him and I do want to see him held accountable. And she was not, shying away from her past statements about him. Trump never has to sit there and listen to someone talk about him like that or talk to him like that and describe him as arrogant and pompous. And today, he had no choice. He was just sitting there. Speaking of what this trial has done to him, regardless of the outcome, seeing him sit there at that table and just have to kind of take it is remarkable.
And this is one of the things that he has always been the most sensitive about, this Stormy Daniels allegation in particular. Caitlin knows this actually really well because asking him about this at the White House would be like World War II for the White House staff. They absolutely hated this line of questioning. And it really it reminds me of how he responded to the Access Hollywood tape. That's definitely him, right, on the audio tape, but he still likes to deny it. And so when he's confronted with the sort of worst parts of himself, he really reacts very strongly and very negatively. And that's what this whole case is about. However, I do think Stormy Daniels, the way that she conveyed that, Trump is going to make the argument, and I don't know what his lawyers are going to do, but he's already been making the case. This is a concocted case to dirty him up before the election, to make him seem bad in front of the American public, even though there's no legally illegal thing that happened here. That's his argument. I don't know that Stormy Daniels helped the prosecutors in batting that down because she seemed to have a personal vendetta against him. It may be justified, but that's what it seemed like based on the
defense when they...
Right. And in other words, that's not going to help the prosecution in any way, shape, or form. It's just not going to help because the woman is out to get him. And she made that really, really clear. Then she added all those salacious details, which could actually get the whole thing thrown out of court. In fact, at one point, even Judge Merchan, and we know that, Judge Merchan is not necessarily in the Trump corner, shall we say, given what we have seen and heard. But nonetheless, he even came forward and said that many of these details were unnecessary. He told the prosecutors to take a break from the testimony because the details were unnecessary. And yet this woman is out there testifying this, that, and the other, doing herself in, frankly, doing the whole case in. She even started yelling at one point as another CNN analyst points out. Watch.
Really heated because Nicholas confirms you call him names all the time. And Daniel starts to sort of yell, saying yes, because he made fun of me first. I mean, this is devolving pretty quickly, right? This is pretty toddler-esque conduct and lack of accountability. But what the defense is very effectively getting at is Daniel's disdain for the defendant. So this so far has been a very effective and dramatic cross and appears to continuing to become even more dramatic. What do you think?
I think what's fascinating is the inversion of how two specific people here are reacting to everything, right? Our team in the room making very clear that Donald Trump has kind of leaned back a little bit. He was very engaged, very animated, very agitated over the course of the morning. Not so much anymore. Stormy Daniels, on the other hand, arms crossed. Things are very tense, starting to get very frustrated. And at one point, it seems raising her voice as well. As Paula was reading through, it underscores there has been a very clear shift, not just in how they're acting, but tonally, but also in where this is. Not just in how they're acting, but tonally, but also in where this is.
What does it tell you? It tells you that Stormy may have just thrown the entire thing. You know, she didn't do herself any favors last time around. Remember, she was on the stand. I told you about this yesterday, talking about how she could connect with dead people and hears voices and this, that, and the other. So I'm looking at this going, guys, like, what are you thinking? Alvin Bragg, what are you thinking? This is your key witness alongside Michael Cohen. I mean, you got Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen, and that's who you're basing your case against a former president of the United States on. So, I mean, some point in the American public, they're like, wait a second. This is somebody who's running for the highest office, somebody who held the highest office. Are you guys just doing this to get a bunch of like tawdry stuff out there? Is that why she said all those things on the stand, even though the judge was like, whoa, you're crossing the line, this is unnecessary? Maybe they don't even care. Think about that. Do they not care if this case gets thrown out? Maybe Alvin Bragg has one job and one job only, and that's to sully the candidate that's running against Joe Biden. Is that really the goal here, along with election interference, because he's now tied up 4 out of 5 days and can't campaign in all those swing states, 6 of them that are up for grabs? I mean, think about that. I mean, here's another very important point, again made on CNN. I got to give them credit. You know, MSNBC is like, oh, these details weren't so bad, and this, that, and the other, because they've planted their flag quite firmly, and they're sticking to it. CNN has too, which is why it's interesting. It's almost like they read the handwriting that is on the wall. This thing's going to get thrown out, and they don't want to have egg on their face, right? So here's one of their legal analysts pointing out, Michael Moore, saying, you know, you're going to have to prove that he somehow falsified some records here, and that there's some kind of fraud going on. You guys haven't even gotten close to that, right? Let's watch.
Who could sign the checks, he asked, for the accounts in 2016 and 2017. And she says, well, you're talking about Mr. Trump's personal account? And the attorney says, yes. And she says, only Mr. Trump. The attorney asks again, was that true back in 2017 and 2016? She said, yes. And she says it's still that way today. So she is still working for the organization. She further says that if Trump didn't want to sign a check, he certainly wouldn't do it. Can you give us some sense of how important this kind of testimony is and how far this went to help potentially the prosecution make their case that Donald Trump knew what was going on here because he signed the checks?
Well, her testimony was important because it starts to connect some of the dots, and that is, you know, can you actually put a pen in Donald Trump's hand? Can you put a check in his hand under his signature? But that really is not the crux of the government's case. The case deals with have you falsified records as it relates to federal election law, and so that has not been accomplished yet. So they're moving that way to it. I mean, this is a paper case. Paper cases are not inherently interesting. This one is a little different because it involves a former president, but the prosecutor has to put some meat on the bone. So they've sort of started building out a little bit of the flesh, and they're getting that way, but they're going to have to now go from he knew about the checks, he signed the checks, over to he actually was involved or gave some direction as it related to these false business records that are at issue in the indictment.
Reason why Alvin Bragg didn't want to bring the case in the first place. It's the reason why I keep questioning why this is all happening. Let's go to Judge Scheindlin, because she takes no prisoners, and she's called it out from the beginning. She was also on CNN with her reaction to all of this. Let's listen to the judge.
The material that came in was not relevant to this criminal case at all. And I think it shows that she was trying to get Trump. I actually thought there was a motive there. She said she hates him. She said she'd like to see him in prison. I think she was purposely throwing out this stuff to make sure the jurors were prejudiced, particularly the women jurors, but probably half of the men too, were really put off.
All right, there's some information on what's going on with the Donald Trump versus New York court case going on as Stormy Daniels testifies. Why don't you go ahead and put in the comments what you think should happen to Donald Trump in this court case. Also, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe and share with a friend. Help the channel grow. Thank you and God bless.